Chris James. If you haven't noticed already, if you're watching on YouTube, there is no intro or exit music. That's because my new computer doesn't communicate with the old soundboard. Anyhow, let's get started right back where I left off last time. Don't shoot. He isn't dangerous, I swear. The man held his hands up as if Pam were armed. Uh, Turn around and face the other way. Pam tried to sound big and well armed. She aimed her cell phone as if it just might go bang. He's just a baby. You have to understand. He won't do it again, honest. Pam couldn't think of how to proceed. So, this is your monster? He's not a monster, he's just misunderstood. Pam wished she had some handcuffs and a gun or two. What is it and where did it come from? I made him. I thought it'd be a good thing. I was just trying to help. Are there any chairs in there? I need to sit down and you need to tell me what's going on. Pam felt her knees hitting together. Uh, you're not the cops? Bogus Anomalous Group Investigations Division. Pam whipped out her ID and showed it like Scully on the X-Files. This was the first time she'd been able to use her ID flipping and showing routine, as she'd been practicing for a moment just like this. She'd thrown in the division because it sounded better than just saying it was just her alone. Barbara had suggested they needed IDs, so when they went out on investigations, they could prove that they were who they said they were. Eddie had taken everyone's photo out in the storage room and then used his home computer. He ran out some cool looking IDs. If you looked close, you could see the artwork around the edges had been copied from a $100 bill. Who are you and what are you doing with that thing? Pam pointed to the monster. My name is Professor Narcoleptus, and this is Orson. He indicated the monster. So you want to explain what you're doing down here in this lab? Pam looked around at all the lab equipment. See, I wanted to do something to make the planet a better place to live in. I decided to try eliminating all the nastiness in the world. The monster was sitting in the corner, snoozing away after a big meal. I began by using an onion. The professor looked around his lab. That thing is an onion? Yes, you know, like the way they used them in the Middle Ages. Onions were used to remove evil curses and protect homes. Professor Narcoleptus could see that she didn't. Back in ancient Europe, it was believed if you placed onions around your home, they would absorb all the evil and the nastiness that was trying to invade your place. She still looked lost. Ancient people used onions to treat all kinds of maladies, and they thought that they would work on evil stuff as well. Pam thought she had heard something about this on the History Channel once. So your little friend, well, your big friend now, is a walking onion? Yes, it took some doing, but once I got him up and walking, well, the rest just came naturally. Does he keep growing as he consumes all the nastiness of his victims? Oh no, he'll shrink back down with time. And you just let him run around willy-nilly, chasing people down and eating them? Pam tried to sound tough and hard. Well, you have to start somewhere. The professor didn't look very contrite. You'll have to stop. You can't just sick your creations on an unsuspecting citizenry. But what can I do? Orson is such a sweet young onion, and I can't think of any way to stop him doing what comes naturally. The professor thought a bit. It's not as if the world couldn't use a good cleaning. Pam thought about this. She looked over at the slumbering creature. It kind of had a smile on its toothy face. Have you ever considered moving to Washington, D.C.? The professor had a contemplative look on his face. You know, that place could use a good cleaning. Pam walked out to her pickup. There were a few police cars parked around it in a way that said important police business was happening here. Lieutenant Slot was standing on the sidewalk. The monster is in the basement of this lab, but he should be gone by morning. Pam was not ready for any kinds of questioning. She had made a deal with Professor Narcoleptus, and he was taking his creation to the capital. Just so long as I don't have to deal with it. Thanks, kid. You did okay. He looked as if he had a smile on his face. You mean you don't care? As long as it's out of my hair, those dweebs in Washington could use a good scrounging. The lieutenant looked at the two government workers now sitting on the bed of Pam's truck. You want to keep these two? No, I found them on the street. I think they need a doctor or at least a shower. The lieutenant waved a uniformed officer over and gave some orders. The two IRS people were unstuck from the bed of the pickup and led away to a waiting ambulance. Tell Mr. Armstrong to give me a call. We missed him last Thanksgiving. The lieutenant turned and headed for his car. Pam considered going to the office, but the sight of her uniform made her want to go home and take a shower. The mess in the bed of her truck made her want to go to a car wash. Maybe I can swing by the car wash and clean my uniform at the same time. She drove away looking for some place to clean up. The new uniforms Jackie had given her felt stiff, but they looked a lot better than her old outfit. As she had gone by one of those spray wand car washes and had tried to spray the front of her school uniform clean. It was a good thing she had the new uniforms handy, since the pressure washer had blasted her uniform into threads and scraps. As she didn't know they put out so much force. She had to jump into the back seat and quickly put on the dry, intact clothes. Her socks and shoes were soaked, as was her sweater, but at least she was decently dressed once more. Her feet squished water out any time she took a step. She walked into the bag office looking for Barbara or Madame Dingus. Are they back yet? Ain't seen either one and don't want to. Hildy was reading Soldier of Fortune magazine. There were people sitting in all the visitors' chairs. All these folks waiting for someone? Pam hoped Hildy hadn't been ignoring them like she did everyone else. They're all here to see that new woman, Gertrude, something about cats and therapy and wanting to see her. Wow. Well, okay. I'll be in the coffee shop. Pam went to see what was new. Eddie pushed her cup across the counter, and then he pointed to the price tag hanging from her skirt. New uniforms? Yeah, a gift of sorts from someone I know. Pam was glad the day was almost done. Not much time left for anything else to go wrong. Barbara came walking in. Walking might be the wrong term. She swayed from foot to foot and just kind of collapsed into a chair. Her hair was standing up, and out of it and she looked as if she were trying a new hairstyle for Halloween. Kind of the Bride of Frankenstein kind of look. Smoke was drifting up from her head. Her ghost hunting vest had a huge scorch mark down the back. Madame Dingus was right behind her. She was all drenched. Her hair was plastered to her skull like a wet dog. Her makeup was mostly on her chin and neck. She could only have gotten wetter if it were still raining. What happened to you guys? Pam hoped it had nothing to do with her sending them out to look at that cloud. It was that cloud, something to do with it. Barbara just sat there looking shocked. Eddie grabbed his first aid bag from under the counter, and he got busy doing his medical things. Cassandra found some old itchy army blankets to wrap the two in and help stave off some of the cold. Pam poured out a couple cups of coffee and scooped in lots of sugar. She got one into each of the two weather-weary investigators' hands. Eddie looked in their eyes and felt their pulses, and he used his sphygmomanometer to get their blood pressure. Lord, that's a big word for blood pressure cuff. Barbara shook off the cold and tried to tell her tale of woe. We drove out to look at that black cloud. It looked just like a storm cloud, only a lot denser. As we were about to stop, a bolt of what looked like lightning came out and blasted the car. Angie got out and pushed the car back out of the way. Barbara looked at her co-casualty. The engine wouldn't start, so she pushed the car all the way back here. Oh, it was nothing. I didn't want you to get wet. Madame Dingus tried to push the hair up out of her face. Pam looked out the library window. The dirt was dry, and there didn't appear to be any rain anywhere. The yard goat was munching on something he'd found under the cement truck. Pam looked back at the ghost hunter. Kind of like a localized rainstorm? Localized as in it followed us back into town. It only stopped raining about a block from here. Barbara pulled a ghost hunting Kleenex from her vest pocket and dabbed her nose. Pam walked outside and looked to the west. The storm cloud was right where it had been earlier this morning. You should drive up there and have a look. You should go home and do your homework. I think I'll coffee. Get a cup of coffee. Pam went inside to see about some mental enlightenment. The voices in her head were becoming quite rude. Hildy held Hildy hid behind her magazine. That guy wants to speak to you. She indicated a man sitting in the waiting area by pushing the magazine in his general direction. Pam looked at who she was referring and nearly screamed. The guy was dressed all in black, from his hat to his spiky boots. He had on round, dark lensed glasses, and his beard hung down to his chest. His coat was leather and shiny. The shirt underneath had frilly lace, but it was also black. His pants looked like black satin. The legs were tucked into the tops of his boots, just below his knees. When he stood up, he was nearly as tall as Hortense. He looked like a goth version of Death. He held out his hand, and when Pam took it as if to shake, he leaned down and kissed her hand. I hear tell this establishment is expeditious and unobtrusive. He stood hovering over Pam as if intent on keeping her locked in his gaze. That and we're fast and discreet. Pam wasn't too sure what those other words meant. Is there somewhere a bit more private? He looked over at Hildy, who was trying to sink lower behind her desk, where we might converse on a project of great delicacy. Pam looked over her shoulder at the library. Several staff quickly ducked out of the doorway. She looked at the status board to see if there was an empty office she could borrow. Why don't you use the dining room? Madame Dingus is on the third floor now, and nobody else is asking for it. Hildy didn't even lower her magazine. Pam led this strange man towards the back of the building next to the kitchen. The dining room had been full of Madame Dingus's personal collection of odds and ends the last time she'd been in there. Opening the door, Pam saw the room was spotless. It looked as good as the day Susie had finished cleaning out all the records and paperwork. Have a seat, Mr. Batwing. Miles Batwing, at your service. So, Mr. Batwing, what is it you wish to hire the bag company to do? Pam had forgotten to get any of this person wants to hire us forms from the library. She grabbed a napkin from the center of the table. I'm looking for a woman about my age, maybe 30 or 35 years. She might have dyed her hair, so that won't help. He made thinking expressions with his eyebrows and his mouth. Oh, of course. She has one green and one blue eye. Just what is it you wish to find this woman for? Pam didn't want to get in the middle of any kind of a domestic dispute, or a lover's quarrel, or a custody battle, or a soon to be murder. She has something that belongs to me, and I wish to get it back. This something wouldn't be a kid, would it? Pam was just about to call this case not ours. Oh, no, nothing like that. She has a statue that is very rare and it just might be dangerous. He looked at Pam right in the eye. Well, actually, he looked into both of her eyes. It was placed in my safekeeping long ago, but she managed to spirit it away one night while I was out. And how do you know she has it? Pam was trying to write all this down with a pencil that wasn't working too well on the cloth napkin. Mr. Unimportant told me you could be trusted with unusual things. He flipped a mental coin. It's called the Absolish statue, and it may have been possessed by a demon. If not returned soon, it might come to life and do bad things. Oh, I see. Pam hoped she wasn't about to do the wrong thing again. Uh, Anything else you can tell us that will help us find her? I tracked her down to somewhere in central neighborhood. That's all I could find out in the last 6 months. She moves around a lot. I decided to try your company in a last possible effort. Central neighborhood, that's where I know some folks who live there. Pam didn't think letting this guy know where she lived was all that good of an idea. Well, we'll see what we can do. Now, if it turns out to be some kind of a divorce case, we don't do those. Pam was trying to remember how Philip Marlowe would have said it. I'm sure once you locate my statue and set eyes on it, you'll see why I'm in a hurry to get it back. Pam headed to the library to consult with Eddie. Do you know anything about, Pam held up the napkin to the light, the Absculish statue? Eddie was dusting Wanda, and he gave Pam his thinking hard look. Try Herbert's big book of possessed statuary. He thought a bit more. It should be under the D section. He adjusted the hat to a rakish angle. D for demon? No, D for don't really know where to put it. Pam walked over to the area he'd suggested and looked. After moving a few books around, she found the one she thought she needed. Pulling the huge tome out, she could barely carry it to the coffee bar. Flipping open to the index, she searched for the name. I don't see it. She flipped a few pages to see what was offered. Prince Wapo came sauntering over and sat down on the page Pam had been looking at. When he noticed she was no longer looking any more, he got up and went to see about getting in someone else's way. Maybe Mosby's book of bizarre home decorations. Hortense went to see if she could track that down. Soon there were staff members digging through the stacks, trying to locate anything on the Absculish statue or any kind of a possessed decorations. Barbara wandered around a bit and then went to sleep in the corner. Her hair had stopped smoking, but it still stuck out in all directions. Madame Dingus had found an old housecoat and had a towel wrapped around her head. She looked almost like her former self, or maybe more like Gertrude. Cassandra found a set of Terry Pratchett books supposed to be destined for Bonnie Fulbright. Here, you might want to put these somewhere you can find them again. She set 10 books on the counter next to Pam. What was that thing called again? The Borsadage figurine? Cassandra asked. No, it's the Absolus statue. I got it, Hortense yelled from way in the far corner, next to the slumbering Barbara. She came walking to the bar carrying a slim little book no bigger than a pamphlet. Bob's Little Book of Weirdness. She showed the cover. Everyone gathered around to try to look over her shoulder. Now, this would still have been difficult even had she not been sitting. It says back in 1905, some guy named Hans Absculus was arrested after all of his neighbors disappeared. The authorities found all the missing neighbors in his basement, dead, drained of blood. They also found his masterpiece he had been creating using their bodily fluids along with several tons of clay. The statue was moved to the local jail, but when prisoners began to vanish, the statue was relocated to a nearby warehouse. The warehouse simply collapsed one night, so the statue was taken to a place of safety where it is supposed to remain till this day. Does it say anything about a guy named Batwing? No, but it mentions some guy named Dingaling who took charge of the thing. Hortense flipped the page. Eddie looked over at the mess of books. Do you suppose, he gave Pam a look, do you suppose we could maybe get Susie to come reshelve our collection? He quickly grabbed a rag and wiped off an imaginary stain. Well, she did a great job with the police files in the basement, Pam said. This received a lot of nods and voices of consent. She does the work of 4 or 5 people, Cassandra added. Everybody agreed with that statement. Hortense only knew of Susie by the stories she'd heard. Just so long as Bonnie stays home, it should be okay, Mikey Baba Ganoush put in. Mrs. Hatchet is a bit of a troublemaker. She was the one who sold that box to Mr. Bandalerium. I guess I could ask. Maybe she'll say no. Pam could think of a lot of reasons to ask Susie to rearrange the library, and a few as to why not. Pam tried calling Just Books, but got a busy signal each time, so waiting to get something done, she decided to just drive over. The parking lot was not quite so devastated looking. Someone had cut the grass to an even height. The gate was now open, and the handwritten sign was now big enough to see from the street. Pam parked and went to the door. I hope Susie's here and not one of the less sane members of her head. Pam opened the door and stepped in. You have a lot of nerve coming around here again. The girl looked to be about 16 years old. She had ponytails sticking out either side of her head. Her school uniform outfit looked just like the one Pam had on, only the tartan was a different color, and she was using Susie's body. Bonnie Fulbright was the least likable, but not the most dangerous inhabitant of the collective body known as Susie. Uh, Hi, Bonnie. Is Susie around? I need to talk to her about doing some work. That bonehead, I hope she never comes back. Bonnie went along the shelves, randomly pulling books out and reshelving them in places they didn't belong. Pam wondered how she could get Susie to pop back in. She thought she might have an idea. How do you like y'all's apartment? Kind of scary, huh? Oh, that place? Give me a break. It has no pool, and the cable is as slow as a geriatric snail. How about the gang members? Oh, those guys are a bunch of wimps. Every time I go outside, they all run and hide. Gee, I wonder why. Pam quickly put one hand over her mouth in case the words tried to sneak out. Well, if I could talk to Sarah, correction, to Susie, maybe she'll take the job and you guys can afford a better place. Bonnie stopped mind Bonnie stopped mid-stride and kind of shook a little. She swung her head back and forth, and then she said, I have to go. She walked away into the dark recesses of the back shelves. Pam could hear what sounded like an argument going on between Bonnie and Mrs. Hatchet. Then the sound of something heavy hitting the floor, followed by the sound of someone being slapped. After about 20 minutes, Susie came walking from the dark. Oh, Pam, I didn't know you were here. Need another book, or is this just a social visit? No. I wanted to ask if you wanted to recategorize our book collection. Maybe create some kind of a user-friendly filing system so we can find the books we're looking for. You mean something like the Dewey Decimal System? Yeah, that thing. Pam had no idea what a Dewey was, but had heard stories from people at school. Let's see, I get off here at 5 p.m. I need to go by and check on Mom. How about 8 o'clock tonight? Pam hoped she could run home, appease her mother with an early visit, eat dinner, and somehow be back at the office by 8. No problem. I'll see you then. Pam pulled into the parking lot and shut off the engine. It wasn't lost on Pam that the tween was being sent with her to keep her out of trouble. Let's go see if Susie can fix the library. Pam got out and headed for the office, followed by Sarah. I don't think Susie has ever killed anyone. I think it's just a rumor. She doesn't look like a killer. Sarah had 0 killers in her short life. Lots of monsters and demons and things that might kill, but none had been human. Susie was there, still dressed for business. Pam opened the door. So, how's your mom? Oh, the usual. She says I should find some nice guy and settle down. She wants me to start a family. You know, there are some things you just don't want to rush into. Pam tried to imagine how a kid raised by this mix of personalities would turn out. You've been here before, so you know where everything is. Can I get you anything? Pam had already told Sharma and Dan that Susie was going to be here all night, maybe for a couple of weeks. No thanks. My mom might come by later tonight. Susie looked at the mess left by the Bagstaff. This should be fun. She rubbed her hands together. I'll leave you to it then. Pam ushered Sarah out the door and back to the pickup. They got home in time for bed, but not in time for homework. Paula had some weird ideas about bed. Pam had to be in bed by 11 p.m., but could get up at 3 a.m. in an attempt to finish any school assignments. This allowed Pam to spend many a night not able to sleep, thinking about having to get up early to finish things she should have finished before going to bed. Sarah somehow always managed to finish her homework before leaving school. Is it really homework if it's not done at home? Chapter 9. Worse Yet. 3 a.m. Pam woke to her alarm and quickly shut it off. Sarah just mumbled something about sheep and went back to sleep. Pam grabbed her book bag and slipped downstairs in her pajamas and fluffy house shoes. She needed coffee and a place to work. She was supposed to write an essay on famous sculptors of Europe for Mrs. Goblin. After putting the coffee pot on, she pulled the history book out and then her laptop. Okay, famous sculptors. Pam thought about all the things she'd rather be doing right now, like sleeping, or slumbering, or maybe snoozing. She popped back awake as the coffee pot made its gurgling coffee-ready sounds. She filled her cup and began searching for anything sculpturally like. Leonardo da Vinci? I thought he was a painter. She wrote down his date of birth. Michelangelo, Donatello, Leonardo? Wait a minute, these guys are the Teenage Mutant Turtles. She wrote down Teenage Mutant Turtles. Once her textbook had given up all of its secrets, she turned for the internet. Sculptors. The trouble with the internet is when you try to search for a simple item, you get overwhelmed with information, 75% of which has nothing to do with the subject at hand. 2,240,000 results. I'll never get through all this. Pam filled her cup once more and began looking. After several pages that offered little towards her assignment, she found something that caught her eye. Mixing blood with clay. This sounded interesting. She began reading. Germany in 1530, Blixten Boyle set about creating a form to house a demon he wished to conjure up in order to destroy his enemies and take over the earth. He used the blood of his household staff to mix with the clay he would sculpt into an enormous monster. He was building a giant that would be unstoppable as well as bring fear to those who encountered it. Pam scribbled all this down and continued reading. If not for his being a far less than adequate sculptor, his creation might have been a success. His grand scheme turned into the laughing stock of Berlin. The head was too small and its wings broke off when it tried to fly. The sculptor, as well as Blixton Boyle, were destroyed when the townspeople burned his house to the ground. Well, that ended well. Pam wrote down some more on the page. Mrs. Goblin sat at her desk, staring at Pam. She had just finished reading the essay Pam had turned in and was now wondering if Pam might need special counseling. Normally, Mrs. Goblin would have set the essay aside and skimmed through them at her leisure, like at home in front of the TV. But since Pam had actually finished the assignment and it consisted of 10 pages, Mrs. Goblin felt she had to read it as soon as possible. Now she wished she'd called in sick today. All the other students were busily reading the chapter on European bakeware. Pam was sitting with her book propped up in front of her with her eyes closed, just so long as she didn't start snoring. Miss Bogus, could I see you after class? This was not a request. Pam jerked awake, dropped her book to the floor. This elicited laughter from the 60 or so students stuffed into the room designed for 30. After class, 10-4. Pam had been reading up on detectives and was learning the 10 codes. She would have snapped off a salute if she knew how. As the class emptied out, Pam stood at Miss Goblin's desk. Miss Bogus, this is by far the most interesting as well as disturbing essay I've ever read. Pam hoped this was a good thing. When I asked the class to write an essay on famous European sculptors, I was thinking more along the lines of Leonardo or Raphael, not, she looked at Pam's paper, Blixton Boyle. He was very famous in Berlin in 1905. Pam was hoping Germany was considered to be part of Europe. I was going to give you a C, since you obviously missed the letter of the assignment. She gave Pam her best, sternest look. But then I must say I've never read an essay that caught my attention with such force. I've given you an A. Pam couldn't believe it. An A? As she'd seen them before, but always on other students' papers, and never one of her own. Next time, try to keep your writing in a less bloodthirsty subject. You can go now. Pam stuffed her paper into her bag. She might need it later. Back at the office, Pam had considered getting Bill to try his best to locate the Abschulisch statue. Is Bill Palmerhausen in? She looked at the status board, but didn't see his name. He's out, came from behind Cooking with Thermite. Dolores Della Noche got a call on her crystal ball from some guy claiming to be King Arthur. He wanted her to help find something called a grail, so she grabbed Bill and they headed out to some island in Nova Scotia. Isn't that in Canada? How are they going to get there? Pam looked at Hildy as if she might have answers. Hey, you're the boss. Don't ask me. I'll just go have a talk with myself. Pam went to the library. Stacks of books were everywhere. Very neat, very orderly stacks. Largest books were at the bottom, with consecutively smaller volumes as they got to the top. Some of these stacks were 8 feet high. The stacks were all squared off with the compass points. All the spines were pointing to the north, and all the front covers were facing the floor. There was a pile of used dust rags set at the end of the bar. The rags were neatly piled and in order of soiling. A neat handwritten note set on top with a request for laundering and folding. The chairs and tables had all been scooted into one corner and were sorted by size, shape, and age. Her uncle was sitting in one of the recliners. He had his feet propped up on a stack of books. Uncle Ray, good to see you at last. Pam hadn't seen her uncle in months. He was the boss, but he ran things with the lightest of touch. Oh, Penny. No, Patty. Peg? He mumbled something under his breath. Yes, good to be seen. Pam had finally gotten over the fact that her uncle had difficulty remembering just about everything, as she had grown up thinking he didn't really like her, since all of her birthday and Christmas gifts had been labeled to kids she didn't know. Now it was accepted any gift with an unknown name must be hers. Pam ran down the list of all the things she'd been doing in his absence. He came by the office all the time, but Pam was in class just about every time. Pam got to the end of her list. I don't know, I didn't know we took assignments in Canada. Canada, yes, the great white north. He fidgeted with his coffee cup. We do odds and ends just about everywhere. So it's looks as if you're doing a good job here. He felt uncomfortable talking to his niece. He was always afraid she was able to read his mind and steal his thoughts. This had all started when she was 3. Ray had gone by to visit his brother and scope out the kid. Knowing that psychic abilities sometimes skipped a generation, he was wondering if what's her name was going to be any good at it. As he stood there gazing at this tiny girl, he suddenly found he had forgotten what he was about to say. The look on her face, a big goofy smile, and it looked as if she had stolen his thoughts. From then on, he suspected she was far more than just a psychic. He never considered that he just might be forgetful. Up there someday, what do you think? Pam looked at her uncle, hoping he would say yes. Uh, well, I don't see why not. He had missed the question completely. Pam was glad to know that someday she would be able to visit Canada on company time. Will I need a passport or a visa? I've never been out of the country before. Come to think of it, I've never been out of Texas before. That trip to Bigfoot land didn't really count. I think so. Maybe you should ask Cordania, Corpus Car, that woman who just went there. Ray got to wondering if maybe it had been Barbara Melton who'd gone to Canada. Odd that a guy who can't remember his own niece's name knows Barbara's last name. Oh, and no, you don't need a passport, just your ID and birth certificate. Ray looked at Barbara sitting in the corner and wondered if she'd just gotten back from wherever it was she'd been. So, Paloma, Panini? Anyway, have you given any thought as to where you're going to go to college? You're what, 25 now? Did my mom put you up to this? No, I haven't really thought about it. Pam wondered if college was any harder than high school had been. Maybe I could be homeschooled for college. Yes, no, I was just curious as to, I don't know, my grades could be better. Maybe the community college. Pam had thought long and hard about her future for an hour or so. Her main plan was to get through the week without setting anything on fire. Pam clomb the stairs en route to speak with Sharma. She wanted to know if anything weird had happened with Susie. The problem with this being the bag office, weird was hard to define. Sharma was dressed as always, a nice, neat dress covered with an old style apron. She looked like a dark skinned June Cleaver, and with black hair. No, nothing odd. There was an argument between her and Mrs. Hatchett, something to do with marriage and grandkids. Sharma had a huge pot of something cooking on the stove. It smelled like hot lava mixed with pepper spray. Dan stuck his head in the door. I found out what the Civil War boys are doing with all that corn. They have a still out behind the storage building. They're making moonshine. Oh no, that's illegal. What should I do? Pam had this thing about not getting arrested. Who's going to arrest them? The ghost police? Pam thought about this. I haven't seen any around, but you never know. I think I should ask them to knock it off. Nah, it seems to make them happy. Dan had sampled some of their brew, but he was more of a beer kind of guy. Are they just drinking it or selling it? Oh, they've been selling it to any and all spirits in the neighborhood. Dan had seen a line of spirits standing by the back fence. Keep an eye out for revenuers, or at least ghosts of them. Pam was wondering if there was such a thing, and if they would try to arrest the Civil War soldiers, and if they would start trouble, and, well, she was worried about things like that. Pamela, dear, anytime Sharma used her full name, Pam got worried. The man who bought the book, the book, do you suppose he'd mind if I kind of just slipped by and I just kind of read a few pages, just to have a good laugh? Pam thought about it. I don't know, but he didn't bother to give me an address. His clients were kind of secretive. Well, if you speak to him, could you ask? I only got about a third of the way through. Uh, I'll see what I can do. Any chance you might fill me in on some of the jokes? Yes, but only after you're old enough. Sharma started laughing just thinking about the book. Pam looked at the others and wondered if this was a good idea. Okay, we'll drive on out, have a look at this weird cloud. We'll take the company car so if anything happens, nobody will be out of vehicle. Barbara's car needed a new engine. The old one had melted and was now just a pile of slag in the middle of the road. Hortense was going along, as well as Madame Dingus and Carol. Grandy had mounted a set of lightning rods on the roof of the Cadillac station wagon, better known as a hearse. It was attached with duct tape and had copper cables that would drag along the ground, hopefully giving the electricity a place to go other than the passenger compartment. Now the Cadillac looked like it had horns. Pam fired up the hearse and they pulled away from the office. Just head straight west until you see a puddle of engine block. Madame Dingus was the only one with experience as far as looking the cloud up. Hortense sat in the passenger seat out of necessity. She didn't fit in the back seat. The closer we get, the farther I wish I was. Everyone had gone through their pockets and removed any metal items, just in case. Cell phones had been turned off and insurance policies had been checked. We're just about the only business covered for acts of God. I just hope this is not what this is going to be. The road was old and beat up, kind of like every road around the country. It probably had something to do with the county commissioner leaving town with most of their budget. This reminds me of last month when we were looking for those missing kids. Hortense had pushed the rearview mirror up to the ceiling. They drove out of town, and soon the sides of the roads were filled with 30 to 40-foot tall pine trees. Pam wondered if there were any Bigfoot hanging out in the woods. She waved any time she thought she saw one. They could see the cloud just ahead of them. Then Madame Dingus said, there's the engine. It looks worse than I thought. The engine was more like a small puddle of charcoal briquettes. Man, it must have been quite a shock. Madame Dingus shook her upper body. The lightning hit the center of the hood. Some of it entered the compartment with us. It felt all tingly, but not in a good way. She closed her eyes. It's what I guess being tased must feel like. As they got closer to the cloud, the sky grew darker. It felt like rain. An ill wind came at them from the right front. Then the air grew thick with current. Pam could feel the hair on her arms standing up. She glanced over at Hortense. Her short black hair was standing up. It stuck out from under her hat like an upset cat. Well, so far, so kabam! Lightning hit the roof of the car. Blue lights streaked along both sides of the windshield and down to the pavement. The smell of burning asphalt filled the air. Quick, drive forward. The road's on fire, Carol yelled from the back seat. Pam hit the gas and the hearse lurched forward. Smoke was billowing up from the road behind them. Wow, I guess the lightning rods worked. She drove forward until the smoking pavement was visible in the rearview mirror. There was a crash from the side of the road, and a huge old pine tree burst into flames. Pine needles went everywhere. Turn back or keep going? Pam hoped they would say turn back. Well, we've come this far. Let's see what we can see, Carol voiced. Yeah, the lightning rods seem to be working, Hortense said. Madame Dingus just nodded. Pam drove farther along the road. As they went, everyone was scanning the trees, looking for any indication as to where the cloud was centered. It seems to be hovering right over the old observatory. Pam was busy driving, letting the others do the weather watching. As she drove, an old beat up RV went rumbling by. The driver looked at her and waved one hair covered arm. The Puckwudgies were heading into town. Hortense said, "It looks like rain," just before the clouds opened up and dropped a ton of water on them. The ditches on both sides of the road began to fill. The wipers were flinging water as fast as the hearse was going slow. Pam pushed the defrost lever all the way over and hoped that that would clear the windshield. This is getting a bit hairy. The rain let up just enough to be able to see the old observatory. The huge white dome was now more of a dirty gray color. Pam pulled over and tried to see past Hortense. Are those cars in the parking lot? Yeah, there's three, but I can't see the license plates. She had a pair of binoculars up and was scanning the building. I need to get closer to get any of the numbers. Pam drove forward to the side of the road that led to an old stargazing facility. The gates are locked. She pointed to a massive rust covered gate, making entry impossible. I can slip through the woods and get a closer look from there, Madame Dingus said from the back seat. If you'd be so kind as to lend me your umbrella, I'll be as quick as I can. Carol was having none of this. Why don't I go? I can run over there and be back in no time. And just how do you plan to get over the fence? I'll go. Besides, as deep as the water is in the ditches, you'd float away. Pam, being the stand in boss, didn't want anyone having to risk catching pneumonia or death from lightning. No, you guys wait here. I'll go. She opened her door and stepped out. Walking to the rear door, she opened it and pulled out the anti lightning device that Grandy had made for her. It was an old aluminum colander wrapped in aluminum foil with a copper rod set on top. It looked like a very cheap imitation of a World War I German helmet. There was a copper cable running down to the ground. Pam was tying the chin strap when Hortense came around and handed her the keys. I'm not about to let you run off into the wet, cold woods and get yourself killed. Carol pulled her anti-lightning device out as well, and then Madame Dingus was strapping her lightning hat on. Okay, then let's get going. Pam led the way into the trees. Since Hortense was the only one with an umbrella and they couldn't all squeeze in under it, she chose to leave it stuck through her belt like a sword. Pam quickly found her loafers were filling with water. Her school jacket did nothing to keep her warm once it got soaked through, and her hair hung down plastered to her head. She looked at her companions, and, well, they all looked as wet as her. There was no trail through the woods. They just wove their way through any wide enough gaps. The observatory barely visible through the pine needles. Well, at least it stopped raining, Hortense whispered. They finally came to the fence. It was 10 feet high and topped, covered with razor wire. Pam looked around for any sign saying, "Caution, electrified fence." She was about to say something when Carol put her hand on the fence, as if about to climb over. She wasn't electrocuted or zapped or even shocked. Give me a push, will ya? Hortense got positioned and was helping Carol get up and over the fence. Madame Dingus spoke up. Uh, why don't we just use this gate? It's not locked. She pointed to a 3 foot wide access gate covered with vines and weeds. Oh, Carol dropped down to the muddy ground. Madame Dingus pushed the gate open. It was rusty and it fought to stay shut, but she wasn't the kind to take crap from no gate. She pushed with all her might. Her shoes slid backwards in the wet grass, but the gate soon was open enough to squeeze through. The four adventurers all got to the inside of the fence and then made their way to the side of the building. The trees and the weeds and the brush hadn't been cleaned out in years, so they had plenty of cover to conceal their movements. They snuck from tree to bush to clump of thick Johnson grass. Had anyone inside the old observatory bothered to look out and seen the four investigators sneaking in the wet brush, they would have thought they were aliens from outer space. But no one expected to have trespassers coming in, since the black cloud was supposed to keep them away. This is good enough. I can see the license plates from here. Hortense got her binoculars up and checked the cars parked by the building. Somebody write this down. She began reading off plate numbers. Wait, I don't have any paper that's still dry. Pam had her wet notebook out, but it was wet. Here, use this. Carol pulled a plastic covered notebook out of her zipper. I use it to take notes, and once in a while the horses get, well, it gets wet. Pam got her pencil out and wrote down the license plates of the three cars. Anything else visible? No, I don't see anyone, just those cars. The building is closed up tighter than a politician's smile. Madame Dingus adjusted her colander. Let's get out of here before we find out if these hats work as well as the car. They turned and began walking the long, sneaky route back to the car. It just wouldn't be an adventure through the wet, drippy woods if somebody didn't slip and fall. Actually, each of them took a turn wallowing in the mud. By the time they got back to the gate, the black cloud was getting darker. Hortense looked up. I don't want to be a test for these goofy kapow! She was hit by a lightning bolt. Being the tallest one in the group, she attracted the first strike. Madame Dingus was hit next, and then Carol and Pam were both hit by the same time. Pam noticed steam coming from the others. Everyone okay? Anybody hurt? Hortense just looked at the steam billowing from her black jacket. Madame Dingus adjusted her lightning hat. I think these things work. She looked at the steaming ground at her feet. I guess I need to get a little something for Grandy to show my appreciation. They did their best to get back to the car with a few more strikes as possible. Pam found a nice deep puddle of mud and sank up to her knee. Hortense had to grab her and pull. Her foot came out with a nasty sucking sound. Oh, shoot, my shoe is still down there. Pam took Pam looked at the muddy hole and slowly filling in with rainwater. She thought about just leaving it down there. Then she thought about having to school with just one shoe. No, Mom would make me go buy a new one. Actually, she'd make me go buy a new pair. She considered walking back to the car with just one shoe. Then she got down on her hands and knees and reached into the muddy opening. Oh, ick. Her fingers groped around her arm in the ground as far as her elbow. At last she found her shoe. Pulling it out, she saw that it was going to need some polish. Her sock was still stuck in the shoe. Sitting on the wet ground, Pam pulled her sock back on, and then she shoved her foot into the wet, muddy, nasty, icky shoe. Man, this is just plain nasty. When she took a step, mud squished up around her ankle. As they made their way back to the car, Pam made a squishy sound with every other step. Getting into the car was difficult because nobody wanted to remove their hats that had now saved all of their lives. They soon were back out on the road and heading back to the office. Lightning hit the car twice, but the rain kept the road from burning too much. Madame Dingus looked around at her cohorts. Now that was exciting. She squeezed some water out of her sweater. We should do this again sometime. That was fun. As Pam pulled into the back lot of the office, the rain quit. She pulled around to the storage building and parked. I best clean up this mess. She looked at the puddle of water on the seats. Madame Dingus pulled her away. No, dear, you go inside and get busy with those license plates. I'll take care of this. Pam was about to object, but the look of determination on Angela's face told her she was wasting her breath. Can I at least send you out some hot coffee or something? That would be wonderful. Madame Dingus grabbed some rags and began drying out the interior. Carol opened the kitchen door and led them inside. Hanging from a coat rack was an old horse blanket, which she wrapped around her drizzling clothes. Pam put on her Pam put in her order with Eddie, and then the three went to Hildy's desk to use the phone. Carol flipped the Rolodex until she found the secret phone number that Mr. Armstrong had come up with. The radio operator at the police station owed him several favors. Pam read off the license plates and then waited while the numbers were run through the vehicle registration computer. This is weird. One of the cars comes back to an unimportant Randolph. I wonder if this is the same guy who hired us to find the book. Hortense had created a big puddle under her chair. I'll bet it's him. How many unimportant guys are there out there? Oh, geez, look at the time. I gotta go. Pam went out to her pickup. She was looking forward to getting out of her wet uniform and into something dry. When Pam got home, Paula was just setting the table for dinner. Pam was torn between a hot shower or just a dry robe. Food or clean? Food won. Back down to the dining room. Her plate was under a pile of brochures. Pam looked at them as if they might bite. What's all this? She looked at her mother. Oh, just a few ideas for college. The rice and beans was accompanied by cornbread. It's time you began thinking about what you're going to do with your life. Pam looked at some of the offerings. There was a brochure from the mortuary school in Houston. Under it was a mortuary school in San Antonio. You want me to be a mortician? She gave her mother a look, more curiosity than shock. It's a good job and it pays well. Besides, you seem to be into that sort of thing. Al was sitting at his place at the head of the table. Your aunt suggested that one. Sylvia? Pam knew she was big into education. No, Ramona. She sent these from Austin. Ramona was currently a resident of the Austin State Hospital, also known as the mental lockup. Next, Pam came to some brochures from technical colleges. There was a brochure from the New Mexico Explosives Academy. Aunt Catherine? No, Aunt Felicity. She hopes you'll be able to help her with her latest space program. The slingshot isn't working out so well, so she's looking into a cannon next. When she says space shot, she's not kidding. Sarah had plopped down next to Pam. Sandy was still being sweet, trying to make up for her disappearing act. Mrs. Bellum was helping out with the meal. She had an announcement. It looks like our house has been fixed at last. Al asked. When will they finish up? Well, they actually finished last month. I just didn't know how to say this. It looks like we're going to be moving out. Sarah wanted none of this. Can I stay here? It's not like I'd be all that far away. Don't you want your own room back? Nah, I like it here better. The discussion went on from there. And with that, I will take a break, and hopefully I'll be back with another misadventure of Pam Bogus. Stay tuned until next time.